and you've seen booms and busts. You've been credited for making folks a lot of money that listen to your strategies. And I want to get some of those strategies with you coming up in the next segment. But in the 8 or 9 minutes before we go to break, Doug Casey of CaseyResearch.com, looking at all the world news and this acceleration towards classical totalitarianism, do you think it's a conscious move or just the fact that different political elites have nothing holding them back? They've gotten away with so much, and so they're just slouching into a form of fascistic decadence.
Well, they're definitely doing that, but I guess the question is it a conscious move, or is it just something that happens with a life of its own? And I think it's a result of the fact that you've got two kinds of people in the world. You've got people that like to control physical reality, and I like those kind of people. They're what improve the world. And then you've got another class of people, and those are people that like to control other people. And that's the type of person that gets into government, that goes into politics. So actually, it's not the best and the brightest people that go into government. It's the lowest and most degraded types that are attracted to the seat of power where they can control other people. So since that's the nature of the government, that it attracts that type of personality, it's inevitable that government becomes worse and more malignant as time goes on. And
sure, and our system, as you know, was the founders who were the opposite, true Renaissance men and women. They wanted a small government set up to try to keep that at bay for a while. The problem is the paradox, that free system, not perfect, but freer than any other, created so much wealth that the government, even though it had a small tax, became large and fat and arrogant. The people became decadent, and now we're about to wake up homeless on the continent our forebears conquered.
Yeah, I agree with you. The situation has actually gotten out of control, and the government is so big and so powerful at this point that it can't be reversed. You know, even if Ron Paul was elected the last time, it wouldn't have done any good, because the first thing that would have happened to him, I believe, is he would have been sat down by the heads of various Praetorian agencies like the NSA and the CIA and the FBI and a dozen others like that, plus a bunch of generals and admirals, and they would have told him the way the game is played. And if he didn't play it, his life would be at risk. And if for some reason he dodged those bullets, he'd be indicted by the U.S. Congress. And if for some reason that didn't work, the average American would be out in the street rioting because his rice bowl was going to be broken, because the average American at this point gets more from the government than he pays in taxes. Not that I believe we should even have taxes.
Well, sure, but that's where I was going to go next, is he'd make some economic announcement, they manipulate the stock market, that's on record now, they would just dive it for a week, claim he did it, and all these fools would then say, run him out on a rail, they would support his impeachment.
Yeah, I think you're right, Alex, and I'm afraid that when the next crisis really blows up in the next little while, the American people, Bubis Americanus, as H.L. Mencken said, is going to clamor for somebody to kiss it all and make it better. We could very well wind up with some type of a military dictatorship in this country as the next step.
Well, that's what General Tommy Franks told Cigar Aficionado in 2013.
I'm a fan of Cigar Aficionado. Do you like cigars too?
I do like them, and of course the type I like, they try to embargo.
That's right. Well, when I see you next, we're going to have to sit down over a whiskey and a cigar and chat about all this stuff at leisure. But of course, tobacco is becoming illegal in this country, so we might have to smoke that cigar someplace outside of the U.S.
It's amazing, from land of the free, home of the brave, to the land of, what would you call America now? Because there's still a lot of great people here.
I'd call most of them whipped dogs at this point. They're whipped dogs, and when somebody in a uniform points a finger at them, they roll over on their backs and wet themselves. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, the idea of America is dead in the United States at this point.
It certainly is, and the constabulary itself are a bunch of whip dogs, scared, following orders. I do see, though, in the federal government and at state levels, we get a lot of leaks, a lot of good intel. As bad as the government is, per capita, there are more awake people I'm finding now in government because they know that things are getting really corrupt than I even see in the general population. So I do find that people in government finally realize and understand something wicked this way comes.
Yeah, you're right, Alex. But I'll tell you what concerns me. It's that the good people that are in government, I think they're being driven out by the bad people. In other words, a decent person, because more and more bad people gravitate towards the government, he doesn't want to be in that environment. It scares him with good reason. He wants to go out someplace else where he's not surrounded by criminal personalities. So, I mean, that's another reason why I think it's getting worse. I hate to be so negative.
No, but we got to be honest, and that's what founded America. Talk about your philosophy, what made you come up with this international man idea that became really a sensation and still is today for a record number of expatriates and others. When did the worm turn for you, or were you always that way, Doug Casey?
Well, like yourself, I'm a libertarian. I believe in free minds and free markets, and I think I was born that way, quite frankly. It may be some type of a genetic mutation for all I know. But the thing is that all of our ancestors, all of us who are Americans, they all came here from foreign countries. And everybody, our ancestors came to America because they wanted to get away from being turned into slaves in different countries around the world. The problem is that the U.S. government, since it's going in the same direction as those governments that our ancestors ran away from, now we have to run away from. We have to go someplace else ourselves. We have to find a new America someplace.
But King George the 10th knows we're running away, and so now our own government's creating a global government to try to capture everyone.
Yeah, it's right. That's right, because we can try to run, but we can't hide. I mean, the fact that at this point it's very, very hard, almost impossible for an American to open up a foreign bank or brokerage account means that we're trapped like lobsters here in the United States. Now, of course, most Americans are going to say, I don't want to leave America. This is the greatest country in the world. And it certainly used to be. But you no longer even have the option of living somewhere else, because if you can't open up a foreign bank or brokerage account, how are you going to get your money out of the country? I mean, the various exits, possible exits, if you want to take advantage of them, are closing almost daily.
You're right. Doug Casey, CaseyResearch.com. Stay there. We're going to come back in the next segment and get into solutions and your prognosis for the future. Won't get fooled again. CaseyResearch.com, Doug Casey. We're going back to him here in just a moment. It has to be individual philosophy of liberty, voting with your dollars, promoting freedom, defending it staunchly, getting in the face of government or corporations or others that trample on those rights, or you will be usurped, you will be taken over like a vacuum. You create a vacuum down at 100 feet underwater, the water's going to figure out a way to get in there. Nature abhors a vacuum. And if you don't stand up and promote the principles of freedom, if you don't jealously guard that jewel, as Thomas Jefferson said, you will wake up homeless on the continent your forebears conquered, to quote Thomas Jefferson yet again. I was quoting him earlier and didn't want to plagiarize. We are at that crossroads. In fact, we've already gotten to the crossroad and started going down the road to absolute serfdom, the road to total tyranny. We can still look back and see the fork, but if we go much further, if we go back, it's going to be overgrown and there's a rock slide in the way. That's what happens politically, societally, historically. We've almost reached the point of no return, and then there are avenues for us through the path we're going down. If we survive it, if pockets of freedom persist through the gates of hell that we're entering, Mordor, Hades, if we survive this trip across the river Styx from the death of freedom, I guess there could be some fiery phoenix on the other side that rises again. It'll probably make our metal that much stronger. It was great tyranny that caused our forebears to stand up in 1776. But they faced a financial tyranny, a military tyranny, not a cultural malaise, a diseased, filthy decadence, a soul-rotting collectivism, the welfare dole that was used to control citizens of Rome. There was not a big welfare system in King George's day except for those allied with the throne. There was not a general welfare system written in to be inverted to basically create a domesticated population. So we'll talk about the way out of this with Doug Casey in a moment. And if I use biblical and epic legendary terms, it's because we're in an epic time. I mean, they're on the news now saying everybody's going to get microchips to buy and sell. They're on the news announcing world government. They're on the news releasing GMO salmon in the ocean that they say will extinct the natural salmon. They're on the news just breaking down huge developments. And the elite are on a power trip. They think they're invincible. My God, we'll be lucky if any of us survive. Hitler thought he was invincible. Stalin, Lenin. I mean, just there's hundreds of these guys. And this elite is that much more megalomaniacal than even predecessors because the technology used by them is a double-edged sword. It just allows them to really have a lot of omnipresent powers. The problem is there's still humans using them, and that's what makes it that much more destructive. We'll talk about that with Doug Casey of CaseyResearch.com in a moment. I know you don't ever want to come on and toot your own horn about your books, about your newsletters, about your invaluable research that's cutting edge. Tell us about some of the research materials you've got available for the public at Casey Research. Talk about some of your books, and then get into what you're doing to get prepared, what you think this monster is that's coming down the road at us, this mad dog, and how you and others are getting prepared. Why are the elites in the Guardian now buying armored redoubts, underground bunkers, running to New Zealand? I mean, when the elite themselves are splitting the scene, they may have cooked this goose a little too much, may have killed the golden goose. Doug Casey.
Where to start, Alex? One thing I was thinking about as you were talking earlier is the fact that governments around the world at this point are trying to get rid of cash. In other words, paper currency. There's a movement on that since everybody has a cell phone today, to use the cell phone to obviate even credit cards and certainly obviate cash so that everything you buy or sell has to go through your bank account. At that point, the government knows exactly what you're doing, what you're buying, and what you're selling, because there would be no cash anymore to even buy a candy bar, quite frankly. Now, this is a very disturbing trend that's taken root just over the last year or two and is accelerating rapidly all over the world. But what do you do about that? One thing that you should do about it, I think, is buy for your personal possession gold and silver coins at this point. Gold and silver have been used as money throughout history for lots of good reasons, and they will continue to be used as money in the future. So for the sake of your personal privacy, you want to own a lot of gold and silver, I think. It'll obviate the government's efforts to make all money transfers electronic. So that's just a thought. And I'll point out right now that as we speak right now, both of those metals are once again in a very reasonable buying zone. Silver is about $16. Gold is about $1,175 an ounce. I think the next step is up for both of them from this point forward. So I think that all of your listeners ought to have a significant stash of gold and silver coins put away in the safest place that they can think of. So that's one piece of advice that I'd recommend.
And by the way, as you know, it's come out in the news, what you and others said years ago, the big central banks have been naked shorting gold and silver, artificially driving down its price while they buy it and hoard it.
Well, yeah, it's very problematical. In the world, there are about 6 billion ounces of gold that have been mined since the dawn of history. We don't know exactly how many ounces of gold there are in the world, but the best estimates are about 6 billion ounces of gold. In other words, less than an ounce for every man, woman, and child in the country. So I think it's incumbent upon everybody to have at least an ounce of gold in their own possession. Better 10 or 20 or 100 or more ounces of gold in their possession. I think the price of gold is going up, and the price of silver perhaps even more. So that's step number one. But step number two is because all of these governments are creating trillions of new currency units. This isn't just the U.S. government, starting with QE1 and QE2 and the bailouts and TARP and all this type of thing. But the Europeans are doing the same thing, the Japanese and the Chinese. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. And the next step, I think, is the Greater Depression gets worse in the next few years, is going to be much higher levels of inflation. It's going to be much worse than things were in 2008 and 2009, and also much different. But one of the advantages, I'm trying to look at the bright side of their destroying all these national currencies, is it's going to create more bubbles in the economy. And right now, as we speak, we're in the biggest financial bubble in history, and it's in the bond market. Interest rates have been driven down to zero, actually zero in some cases, which means the bond prices are at an all-time high. So I think the next step is that the bond market crashes, and that's much more serious than the stock market crashing, but it'll bring the stock market down too, and it'll bring the real estate market down with it quite possibly, because unfortunately in the U.S. and most of the Western world, real estate floats on a sea of debt, and if you can't borrow at reasonable interest rates, you really can't buy or sell real estate, because most houses have mortgages against them today. So it's a serious problem, but it's a problem that presents opportunities, because although most people are going to lose most of what they have, it's going to be possible to capitalize on that, and as a speculator to win from the unwinding of all these things.
And people can specifically go to kcresearch.com and see some of the strategies you've been employing?
Well, we have a lot of free publications. We have paid publications, too, that have specific stock recommendations. But in terms of general advice, we've got a huge amount of free information that I urge people to access to start thinking about these things and start moving. Because, you know, the problem is that a lot of people that listen to you, and for that matter, listen to me, they think about these things, but they don't act. And I think the time is getting short for action. And what form of action should they take? Putting aside a significant amount of savings in precious metals is the first and most important thing. Second thing is, if you can, if you're in a financial position to do so, diversify your assets internationally, so all of your wealth isn't under the control of just the U.S. government. And three would be to look for ways to capitalize on what they're doing, speculations that will profit from all the money creation going on. So you don't want to be a deer in the headlights. This is the time for action.
Let's talk about deer in the headlights, because every financial expert out there says, obviously, the trillions in derivatives, the quadrillions, the velocity of money, the QE unlimited, the currency race to the bottom, what's happening with the bond markets, that it's a bubbles that will pop, and then it runs from bad to worse. But because of all their high-frequency trading and plunge protection teams and other manipulations, they're able to build this bubble, I think, to a level never before seen. A, do you agree with that statement? Is it wrong? And how do you see this thing coming down?
In other words, what's going on right now is building up to something much bigger than what happened during the last depression from 1929 to 1946. It's much bigger, much more serious, and governments are much more powerful than they were back then. So it's hold on to your hat time, and I think we're right at the edge of the precipice right now. But I don't think most people are even aware of that, because when you walk outside, the sun is shining, children are still playing, maybe the occasional cop is beating one with his nightstick, but you can go down to the Walmart and buy cheap goods. Everything looks pretty good on the surface, but I think it's a hologram that's about to be exposed at this point.
And that's why the elite are digging into armored bunkers. What are they thinking is going to come? I mean, I know you talk to a lot of really wealthy people, but these are real entrepreneurs that actually go out and explore and mine and drill and build things. They're not the parasite variety, but I know a lot of those folks that aren't parasites, they're also preparing escape plans as well.
Well, so much of what goes on in the world today is financed by the U.S. government. In other words, you're quite correct about that. There is cause for optimism, of course. It's that there are two reasons why things have been getting better despite the depredations of government with its taxes and its regulation and its currency.
Let's end on a positive note. Sorry to interrupt. Doug Casey, CaseyResearch.com. Let's come back and talk about the flip side. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. We've been talking about the problem and some of the solutions, but what are the optimistic, positive things with our final segment with Doug Casey, the legend, straight ahead. I'm Alex Jones, Infowars.com. All right, final segment with Doug Casey. I'm going to get into economic news, world news, huge attacks on the Second Amendment, and more, and open the phones up in the third hour. We're also going to get another update and see if there's been some developments that may be taking place in Austria covering Bilderberg. But Doug Casey, getting into the optimistic, good things that are happening, despite corporate combines that work with government to basically freeze society in a new dark age, the renaissance continues. So go ahead and finish up with some positive notes, Doug Casey.
Thanks, Alex. Two things, actually, are the mainsprings of human progress and cause for tremendous optimism. Number one is that the average person understands that he has to produce more than he consumes and save the difference. And that builds capital, the excess of production over consumption. And every individual knows he has to do that for his own life. And as you set that aside, that builds capital, which allows civilization to progress. The second thing is science and technology. There are more scientists and engineers alive today than have lived in all of previous history put together. And they're inventing things, they're discovering things, and that's what really makes life better. And that ties in with the capital saved by average people, because you need capital in order to do science and engineering. The problem is this, and how the government could destroy these two mainsprings of human progress, is that when the average guy saves, what does he save in? He saves in his currency, and he saves in dollars. But what happens if the government destroys the national currency by inflating it? you wake up, you've got $100,000 in the bank that you were planning on retiring on. That's $100,000 that's available for entrepreneurs to borrow or that you could invest in stocks and so forth. But if that money is destroyed, like a Zimbabwe dollar was destroyed a few years ago, that capital has vanished. Now your retirement is gone, and the capital for the scientists and engineers is also gone. So it's a double whammy. And the force that's doing that is the government by inflating the currency. So there's cause for lots of optimism for the two reasons I mentioned, savings and technological progress. But the state could destroy both of those things by destroying the value of the dollar. I hope I've been clear as to how that would work. But so it's kind of a good news, bad news kind of thing.
Well, Doug, I agree with you. I mean, I totally agree with you that this is going on, and I just hope the general public realizes that they're in great peril if they don't get involved in trying to basically inform others. But it almost seems like either somebody cares innately or they don't care. I mean, I'm not really into predestination when it comes to my soul or when it comes to other things, but it does make you wonder why some people will not get involved promoting freedom, even if their life depends on it. Like I try to tell people that major shopping carts have cookies. They know whether you're a big spender. They know if you're a smart shopper. They will charge you more depending on your habits. I put a video out on that, and a bunch of commenters said I was making it up, even though it was in mainstream news. I mean, it's like there seems to be a inverse instinct to want to be cheated and screwed over. Maybe these people just don't want to believe they're being screwed over. It's just crazy.
Well, I don't know where it's going to end, Alex, but we're going to find out the next couple of years.
We are. Doug Casey, do 5 more minutes with us. I know you got to go. I want you to finish up back in 60 seconds. Looking at this situation, finish up that point you were trying to make. And then I wanted to ask you, in closing, in your gut, promoting liberty for 40-something years, what do you think is going to end up happening to humanity? Because we could have government crazies and others make mistakes of the past, and then it would just be, 100 million dead in World War II, or it'd be Mao Zedong killing 84 million of his own people because leftists in the CIA helped put him in power. But now with nuclear weapons and all the rest of it, I mean, these control freaks really could destroy everything. We've got a report on Infowars.com coming up in the next segment after you leave us, where Bilderberg is inviting Hillary's chief of staff to the event. She was at Bilderberg 2008. I mean, is this really the best the elite can give us, Doug Casey?
I don't know, Alex. There's cause for optimism, but perhaps at this moment a lot more cause for pessimism. All I can tell you is what I do myself. It's funny. I go on shows like yours, and I say these things, and I ask myself, why am I doing it? I'm a rich guy. I don't really have anything to gain. I mean, I have a publishing business where I talk about these things, but the risk-reward of saying things that run counter to the mainstream is getting a little bit out of whack. And I ask myself, why am I taking the risk to even say these things? And I guess the reason is I actually believe in karma. What goes around comes around. And I think that if out of the people that are listening, only 1 or 2 people, something twigs in their mind and they start thinking and start investigating, it's a good karma thing. On the one hand, I believe in the French phrase sauve qui peut, which means basically let he who can save himself, or every man for himself. But on the other hand, I really do believe in karma and trying to make people aware of the problems in the world today so they're in a position to save themselves. I think things are going to get really grim. I think they're going to get really grisly over the next few years. I mean, that's all I can say. And I say these things, it's not particularly to my advantage. It's not even to your advantage to say these things, because it's painting targets on our back. on our backs in today's world. But
well, Doug, I mean, I can answer your question for you, so you don't know why you do it. I've psychoanalyzed myself. It's not that I'm some goody two-shoes fake bleeding heart. They've got studies out that the fake bleeding hearts are 6 times more likely to actually rob from you or not to give in charity. They have big studies out of the university in Canada that it's libertarians and then conservatives are the biggest givers to charity. And you want to take care of yourself. You want to help your friends and family by building them up. You want to teach them how to fish, not give them fish. And you have a feeling of connection and empathy, and you want to build up humanity, and you want to teach people what you've learned. You want to empower people. But these control freaks see other people empowered as a threat to them because they're so weak. Anybody who's a real leader, who's truly strong, wants to build up others because you're so confident.
That's right. I like to be surrounded by other people that are successful and moral and rich. I mean, it makes my life better and richer and easier when I'm surrounded by people like that. And just as you said, it's the sociopaths of the world that want to bring everybody else down because it artificially makes them higher. And those are exactly the kind of people that are drawn to the government today. It's very disturbing.
Absolutely. Teamed up with select corporations to create a global monopoly under their control with a planetary cashless society. Powerful interview, Doug Casey. Thank you so much.